Good Lord, ride all the way.
A 10,
9,
8,
7,
6,
5,
4,
3,
2,
1.
Hello and welcome to Slooh, especially Slooh members watching on the live channel. Don't forget you can snap images using the StarShare camera below the show's video panel, and you can also use the chat box to the right if you want to ask us any questions. So what are we doing tonight? Well, we are witnessing a cosmic coincidence of sorts as the full moon appears on the same day as the June solstice. We're going to be telling you exactly how rare that is a little bit later as we look at this live image. There is the moon blazing over Slooh's Canary Islands Observatory. Now, to celebrate Slooh's annual June solstice party, we've teamed up with our friends at the Old Farmer's Almanac to bring you some of the fascinating folklore surrounding the full moon and the solstice. And we've also teamed up with our partners at the Science Channel. So a huge welcome to all you Almanac readers and Science Channel viewers joining us tonight for this special Slooh show. Now, don't forget, you can also ask us questions. Just send your comments or even your own images to @Slooh. So just tweet those to @Slooh. We have got some terrific live image streams for you tonight. From Slooh's observatory here at the Institute of Astrophysics of the Canary Islands, and tonight our Southern Hemisphere Observatory in Chile, where we'll have some fabulous live views of the red planet Mars and the mighty ringed planet Saturn. And maybe for Jovian fans out there, we will have some Jupiter shots as well. Now, let's take a quick look through the images at the moment. And this is our special low light camera. It shows the entire sky from one horizon to the other at Slooh's flagship observatory. You can see down there on the left hand side, there are the domes. And that thing, it looks like daylight, doesn't it? Well, it's not. That's the moon. The moon is lighting up the sky. And we've also got our Chile all-sky camera that we'll show you a little bit later as well. But let's take a quick look at what we call our constellation cam. Now, this is a really interesting one. What we've got in here is we're showing you two planets in one view. This is an incredibly wide field of view. And on the right-hand side there, we've got Mars, and on the very left, we've got the ringed planet Saturn. And later on, we are going to be showing you those close-up views from the Chile Observatory. Wow, we have been getting some cracking views from down there. Now then, we've also got some moon images as well coming through. What have we got coming through on our live image streams tonight? We'll flick to them when they come on. Oh, well, we're going to come to those a little bit later anyway. So what have we got in store for you tonight? Well, to kick off the show, we are going to be explaining everything there is to know about the June solstice and the full moon. And to do that, I'd like to welcome Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, Bob Berman, to the show. Welcome to the show, Slooh's annual June solstice show, Bob.
Thank you, Paul. Great to be here.
Now, we're going to be interrupted because when the students get these live images coming in, they're going to flash them up on the screen. And you know me, a gorgeous image of Jupiter. Oh, and there we go. You know, just to prove me right, there is the wonderful full moon. This is from the Wide Field Telescope in the Canary Islands. What do you make of that to start off with, Bob?
Well, it's lovely, you know, round, the perfect shape. The Greeks regarded that as perfection itself, a divine shape, and there's not a lot of perfectly round things in life. You know, oranges are sort of round, but the moon and the sun, they're perfect so far as the eye is concerned. And right now, tonight, having a full moon on the solstice, it means that as the sun is setting, full moon is rising. They're opposite each other in the sky. The full moon has its highest path through the sky today. That means the full moon has to have its lowest arc of the year. So tonight, if you go out when the moon is highest, 1 a.m., it'll be the lowest full moon of the year. Very cool.
Yeah, Very cool. And you say, you talk about the moon being so incredibly round. Maybe you can point out when we see some of the images coming in of Jupiter and Saturn, those are kind of the total opposite. Those are really quite squashed and flat. And I have had members email me sometimes asking, is there something wrong with the telescope? Because Jupiter kind of looks a bit squashed and flat. But anyway, Bob, we are going to get on to the rarity of this cosmic coincidence of the first full moon, this full moon occurring on the day of solstice a little bit later in the show. But let's first cover some of the solstice basics, or 101s if you like. Now, we've got some great illustrations from our friends over at timeanddate.com that'll help us explain what a solstice is. So what is it that these are showing, Bob, when they pop up?
Well, if your planet has a tilt to it, then it's going to be significant if the hemisphere that you live on is tilted toward or away from the sun. And that's what we're seeing. We're, of course, in the northern hemisphere. Look at us at the top. We're tilted toward the sun. That naturally makes the sun higher in the sky and means it's out for more hours. Higher sun means a stronger sun. Planets that have no tilt, I know we'll get to this later, Mercury and Jupiter have no solstices at all, no seasons at all.
So here we can see that the angle, Earth is tilted at this angle, but it doesn't change throughout the year. It has to do with the orbit around the sun, which is changing which hemisphere is kind of pointed further towards the sun, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Think of yourself circling around a campfire, but leaning, tilting, let's say, toward the north, one direction, your body leaning. Well, when you're leaning toward the campfire so that your head is leaning toward, fine. But as you circle around it, when you're halfway around, now you're leaning away from it, aren't you? If your tilt has remained oriented in one direction, like towards the north, and now your head feels kind of cold because it's in shadow, it's pointing away from it. So it's just like that. We do not change. Well, we do in the course of
this is the diagram that I wanted
700 years, but not in our lifetimes.
Okay, this is the diagram that I wanted for you to explain this. And my next question actually was going to be, it's easy to get confused, isn't it, between the two solstices that occur during the year and the two equinoxes. So can you walk us through this diagram? There we are. The picture today is the left-hand side of that, June solstice. So can you explain to us what happens as the year progresses?
Well, as you see, the northern hemisphere keeps tilting in the same direction. Changes over 26 millennia, but not during our lives. So in the course of a single year, on the left side, we in the northern hemisphere tilted toward the sun. On the right side, much less pleasantly, we're tilted away from the sun. And if you're close enough to the North Pole, it means that as Earth goes around and around, you don't even get any sunlight at all. From the Arctic Circle on north, you don't even peek into the sun. But even some distance away from that, you have a few hours, the sun is never high in the sky. And so it's dramatically different. In between, the pictures on the very bottom of the screen at the very top of Earth, the northern hemisphere is neither tilted toward or away from the sun, but it's just leaning sideways. And that's, as the name suggests, equinox or equinox. You can say it either way or either way. And you're going to get equal day and equal night. So we're at the extreme today, the time of, and that varies depending upon where you live. If you were living at the equator, believe it or not, at the equator, it's always 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night to the second throughout the year. There's no change at all. As you get further and further into higher latitudes, then it changes tremendously.
Now, we've had a question come in, and I thought of this one as well, actually. This is from Jeremy on Twitter, and he's saying that at this time of year, he understands that when you're living in the north, the sun doesn't actually drop below the horizon. But what you said earlier is that the sun is rising and the moon is setting because it's full moon tonight. So does that mean that the moon will also travel around the horizon?
Well, yes, except that its arc is so skimpy that because it rises only in the southeast, it sets in the southwest. So it has, let's say, for mid-northern places, Denver, New York City, places like that, the moon tonight will only be up about 9 hours, not very long, whereas the sun is up 15 hours or 15 and a quarter hours even. And then the other solstice, they change their roles. It's the sun that's only up about 9 hours each day and doesn't get up very high to boot, even at its highest.
Right.
And it's the moon in the wintertime, the December and the January full moons that are nearly overhead. They're never directly overhead, except from Hawaii. No state of the Union and no part of Canada or no part of Europe ever sees the sun or the moon straight up, but they get darn high today, or in the other solstice, the moon gets very high.
Yeah. Now, actually, tell me, Bob, you said that you had some school kids earlier today doing an exercise out in their schoolyard. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
What
A
were they up
kindergarten
to?
teacher that I know brought all the kids out at 1 o'clock, which is when the sun is at its highest point during these daylight savings time months. In the wintertime, when we're on standard time, the highest sun is at noon. Nowadays, it's 1 o'clock. And she had all the kids look at their shadows. And these 5-year-old kindergartners were so delighted. They're just squealing with happiness that they could almost see no shadow. They were baby shadows, they said. They almost no shadow at all. And all of us can look for that tomorrow, because there really is almost no change. The word solstice means the sun has stopped. And so there's really almost no change between today and tomorrow. So 1 o'clock tomorrow, you can get the same thing. Do your Puxtatani Phil Groundhog Day imitation. Go out at 1 o'clock and check out your shadow, and you'll see virtually none.
Okay, I love that. I think we should christen those solstice baby shadows. Now, here we've got a live view from one of the Earth cameras that we've got. And there it is. Does this mean, Bob, that it's already solstice down there?
Yes, and from there, of course, with the winter solstice, then they have the opposite situation of low sun, shortest day of the year down in that gorgeous country of New Zealand. And they're opposite. So it's interesting. So it's still a collaboration of the whole world. We're combined. We have every experience.
Yeah. And we specifically in all of our publicity, we've been calling this the June solstice because we've got a lot of members down in the southern hemisphere as well. We've got an observatory down there as well, for goodness sake. So we don't really like to refer to it as the summer solstice because it's not quite the same for everybody.
Yeah, we're trying not to be chauvinistic about it and just enact the way we used to, which was that the northern hemisphere dictated everything in the world now. So we say June and December rather than winter and summer.
Now, Bob, turning our attention to the full moon tonight, if we can go back to one of those live shots that we've got, are there any mechanics or geometry similar to those that we've seen with the solstice that cause and generate the full moon and other moon phases?
Well, yes. The full moon is always opposite the sun in the sky. Simply put, it means today as the sun set, that's when the full moon rose. Everybody can see that for themselves, that as twilight deepens, there's that low full moon. The moon actually was full this morning at using Eastern time at 3 minutes after 7. So it actually was just as full last night and tonight. So we got 2 chances to see it. And the big issue here is that because that moon is adding light to the solstice is already the brightest day. The full moon does not add much. It's 450,000 times less bright than the sun, but it is reflected sunlight. So we can say that today, for the first time in X number of years, we'll talk about that later, how many years it's been, we have the brightest solstice, really, because we have the full moon on the same day, adding a little extra light.
Absolutely, I hadn't thought of that one. And of course, astronomers usually low the full moon because it means you can't really image all those lovely faint galaxies and nebulae. But we've got some planetary shots coming up from the Chile Observatory a little bit later, which will be fun. Now, Bob, you're going to join us a little bit later, and we're going to discuss this wonderful cosmic coincidence and exactly how rare it is, because there's been some difference in some of the reporting, hasn't there?
Yes, and all the points are valid, and they're kind of fascinating too. Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah. So we'll explain it. Bob, thank you very much for now, and we'll see you a little bit later.
My pleasure.
Now then, We are going to take a short commercial break, but first, to our new viewers tonight, joining us from the Old Farmer's Almanac and the Science Channel tonight. If you're enjoying what you're seeing and what you're hearing, I want to encourage you to become a member of the Slooh community. It is free to try, and there's absolutely no obligation. At its core, members control our robotic telescopes, the very telescopes that we're seeing tonight, both here in the Canary Islands and at our Chile Observatory. And you do that via a really simple but powerful interface to see everything that glows in space. In fact, Slooh members have taken well over 4 million photos of over 50,000 different objects in the sky. And Slooh works just like a jukebox. One member controls the telescope, while all of the other members get to see those live views. And then everybody can contribute to the ongoing conversation. We always say it feels a little bit like cavemen and women gathered around a campfire. We wonder together at the universe and share our great diversity of perspectives. It really is space for everyone here. So please do give it a try. And in the process, you'll be supporting our ability to make programs like this available to the public. Now, don't go away. We'll be right back after this short commercial break when we'll learn all about this mysterious and rare cosmic coincidence with our full strawberry moon occurring on the day of the solstice. Be back soon. Hello and welcome back. As I already said, this is a pretty rare happening, a cosmic coincidence of sorts. And who better to help us understand the weird, the wonderful, the strange in space than Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, Bob Berman. Welcome back, Bob.
Oh, yes. Great to be here. Exciting night.
Now listen, Bob, we're looking at this image of the full moon from the Canary Islands Wide Field Telescope, but I've been told we have got our live images coming in from the Chile telescope. So as each one of these pops up, this is a live image coming straight in from the telescopes. Tell me what you're seeing. So here we are. We just happen to have joined it, not when it's viewing Mars, Saturn, or Jupiter, but it's showing us this glorious close-up of the full moon. What are we seeing here, Bob? What are some of the features that people can look at tonight?
Well, as you well know, you and I and serious astronomers tend to hate the full moon because the sunlight's shining straight down on it. So we've traded craters and mountain ranges and detail that require shadowing to see well for a completely different experience. At the full moon, we have what are called albedo features, which means different reflectivities. Now, the moon is darn unreflective. It's the same brightness as an asphalt parking lot or an asphalt highway, pretty darn dark. But that varies a little bit from place to place, and we're seeing those dark blotches. That's what stands out, first of all, that Galileo and his pals all thought were oceans, a reasonable hypothesis. Yeah. And so they're still called mare, which means seas or oceans, all of which are named for either weather phenomena, like the Sea of Rains, Ocean of Storms, or emotions, such as the Sea of Tranquility, Sea of Serenity, the Sea of Crises. You know, there's a little psychodrama in it also. And we also see those bright spots that have rays sticking out of them. Look at the bottom, the crater Tycho, where you can actually see that how badly it got clobbered, that it threw white material for thousands of miles across the lunar surface.
And this is the best time to see that kind of feature. Now, Bob, while we carry on and talk about, you know, this rare cosmic coincidence, I'm going to rely on the studio to be popping up the live images of some of our other targets. So Viewers, please excuse us. I always get a little bit excited when I see an image of Jupiter or Mars or Saturn. So, you know, we might break off our discussion and maybe take a quick look at those glorious images coming in. Now, Bob, cosmic coincidence. We have seen a lot of different numbers banded around in the media about the last time this full moon occurred on the same day as solstice. So how rare is it exactly, and when was the last time this happened?
Well, it's certainly rare. It shouldn't be that rare. It should happen on average once every 15 to 30 years. But it's been longer than that. And the reason there's any ambiguity at all is, what do we call a day? We're talking about when the full moon happened the same day of the solstice. But what's a day? Is it a day in the Eastern time zone, the American or Canadian time zones? Or is it the day on Greenwich Mean Time, which is kind of the world's official day? And if you just used Greenwich time, well, then 49 years ago, we had this happen. Back in 1967, we had such a full moon meeting the solstice, but that did not match up for the Eastern time zone in the United States or Canada, and it certainly didn't match up what the Old Farmer's Almanac uses, since before our great-grandparents were born, they decided to use U.S. and Canadian time zones. So for the people in all American time zones, there was not a full moon matching that. So because of that ambiguity, let's not use that date. Some say, well, what about 1987? There, the full moon met the solstice, was the day of the solstice. Aha! But there, it was only for the Greenwich Mean Time zones and didn't happen at all in U.S. time zones, or the other way around. So how are we going to solve this? Well, in 1948, now we're going back 68 years, bam, there was a full moon on the solstice in the United States and Canada, and also for the rest of the world too, for the Greenwich time zone and the rest of the world. So if we really want to be clear and unambiguous and have nobody writing in angry letters of complaint, we can say for sure, 68 years ago, 1948 was the last time we all had a full moon on the solstice, and that's a long time since that's happened.
So that prompts another question. How is the actual moment of solstice measured?
Well, that is the moment when the sun is highest, when the Earth is tilting most toward the sun. And these days, we no longer have to use drudgery and tables and charts, which are prepared, because we know the solar system now. We've got this pinned down beautifully. It's not like the way things were in the 18th century. Now computer programs just give it to the nearest second, and the tables come up with it. And the only question is, where on Earth is that overhead sun going to occur? On the Tropic of Cancer. It's going to be somewhere along that line on the Earth, the Tropic of Cancer. The sun will be straight overhead. But will it be overhead in someplace in Brazil, or will it be in the Indian Ocean? Which part of the Tropic of Cancer is going to have that overhead sun? Actually, come to think of it, India, I'm just thinking of the latitude of India, it would be someplace in India, not the Indian Ocean. And and that varies from year to year, because as Earth spins, it's going to be someplace on the Earth at that moment is going to have the overhead sun exactly at its highest point at 1 p.m. on June 20th or 21st. And even that, by the way, changes, because as the century goes on, the solstices creep earlier and earlier and earlier. So that's why we had it today on the 20th. And earlier on in our lives, it was always the 21st.
Okay. Now, Bob, I've also been, I shouldn't really do this. I've been looking online, and I've been, you know what the kind of content is out there, you know, you can't really believe it. But, you know, there's pestilence, disease, and all sorts of things forecast because of this cosmic coincidence. Are there really any implications of this full moon occurring on the same day as solstice?
Implications, you mean we're talking sort of new agey things,
physical implications? Does it affect
weird stuff?
us? Does it affect us in any way?
Well, the moon by itself, there's of course a lot written about this, what the moon can do to us. There used to be thought that it would cause lunacy, and now we find that no, admissions to mental hospitals and calls to crisis centers do not increase at the time of the full moon. Some thought it increased with crime had a correlation with the full moon. We find that no, it does not. A big study done in Dade County, that is Miami, found that violent crime does increase on weekends and during hot weather, but not during the phase of the moon. So what does the moon actually do to births? That was a real controversial one. But many studies, including 8 million births looked at in France, shows that there's no correlation with the phase of the moon. And yet we can't say it causes nothing. After all, menstrual cycles, the human menstrual cycle, and the phase from full moon to full moon are pretty darn exact. And we do know that there are big consequences for sea life, especially in the intertidal marshes, where there's major flooding, and crabs and their predators like gulls are very much attuned to the cycle of the full moon when the tides are much higher than at other times. I personally think that the brightness of the full moon is more of a factor than any tidal influence that it might have. And that long ago, we humans needed that brightness to be able to navigate at night.
Sorry, Bob, I just saw we hopped on very quickly to Jupiter. We had a split moment of Jupiter, and then Mars popped up on our screens. Now, this is live from the Chile High Magnification Telescope. This is one of the telescopes that Slooh members use every night. Now, we were going to move on to the next bit of our show, but we'll wait for this image to pop into color. And we can see some large features on there. This is going to be a cracking image when this goes to color. Now, Bob, I was going to ask you one other thing about the cosmic coincidence, but just give us a little teaser for later on, because we're going to be talking about solstices on other planets. Is there a solstice on Mars, and how does it?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Mars
has a axial tilt only 1 degree greater than ours. Ours is 23.5 degrees. Theirs is 24.5, which means the seasons are quite similar, except because the Martian year is roughly twice as long as ours, the seasons last twice as long. And there's another difference too, and that is the Martian orbit is about 3 times more elliptical or squashed or oval shaped than ours is. So as the seasons happen, there's more of an effect of whether the planet is close to the sun or not. We're looking at Syrtis Major, I believe, that dark splotch on Mars. And at one time we thought that the polar caps, which are kind of minimum just at this time of the Martian year, the northern cap, which is mostly water ice, and the southern cap, which is mostly dry ice or carbon dioxide ice, they're not symmetrical, because even though the Mars takes turns tilting one way or the other and gets solstices, Mars is closer to the sun when the northern axis is tilted towards it than the southern, and so you get more warmth. It's an asymmetry that we do not experience here on Earth. Actually, we do to a little extent, because we're closest to the Earth every year the first week of January. That's when our perihelion is, and because of that, whoever is tilting towards the sun at around that time, that means you and me and all of our friends in the northern hemisphere, we're tilting toward the sun. We're tilting away from the sun just when we're closest to the sun, and so that partially compensates us for the winter and makes the winters more moderate than they otherwise would be. And because of that, the southern hemisphere, which gets their summer solstice just when they're closest to the sun, would have ferocious summers were it not for the fact that the southern hemisphere of Earth has more water, has more ocean, and that produces the moderation.
Well, we'll pick up on this a little bit later on, because I need to explain this image to viewers. We are not looking at the mysterious planet Nibiru appearing next to the red planet Mars, just when we want a beautiful color image to pop up. What's happened here is the different filtered images that make up the color image, they haven't aligned properly, so we're actually seeing the green filtered image just slightly offset from the blue and red filtered image. So that's pretty, but hopefully we'll get a good one a little bit later on. Bob, thank you for joining me here. You're going to be back a little bit later, and we'll talk more about solstices on other planets, because there's one especially that I know you want to talk about, which is quite an extreme example.
Okay, good.
That was Bob Ehrman, astronomer and astronomy editor for the Old Farmer's Almanac. Now, keep an eye open on those live feeds. If you're watching on the Slooh Live channel, you'll be able to snap images of all of those objects from all of our feeds tonight using the StarShare camera. Don't forget, you can ask us questions in the chat box, or Almanac readers and Science Channel viewers, they can just tweet at Slooh if you've got questions for me or any of my guests. Now, coming up next, a full moon on the same night as the June solstice might be incredibly rare, but solstices themselves happen twice a year, and they're very important to a number of societies throughout history. I'll be sitting down with Janice Stillman, editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, who is going to tell us all about the way other cultures have celebrated the solstice. By the way, immediately after this show, I'm going to be legging it down the road because I live fairly close to Stonehenge, and I'm going to be joining 20,000 other people on those stones. Well, on or around them, you're not really allowed on them, but people do go on there, but around those stones to witness sunrise tomorrow morning. But because it's full moon, we're going to be seeing the full moon set as the sun rises. So that's going to be an absolutely spectacular event at Stonehenge. Now, before we take a brief commercial break, I want to remind you of a couple of huge shows we've got coming up here at Slooh. On June 30th, we are celebrating Asteroid Day by taking a look back over 12 years of Slooh's biggest and best and near misses of asteroids, and our live broadcasts over the years, as well as looking to the future of what we consider is a little discussed far greater threat to life on Earth. We will also find out what NASA, along with some private companies, are doing to protect us from the risk from asteroids. And we'll look to the future to discover what might come from tracking asteroids, or if asteroids are really the threat we should be focused on. And then on July 4th, well, other than hopping off to the cinema to see the new Independence Day, we will be ringing in America's independence with a bit of an out of this world adventure as the Juno mission makes its final approach to the mighty gas giant Jupiter. Orbit entry starts at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and so does our show. We will also be showing you, reminding you of the fabulous live images we took of that spacecraft as it went through one of its gravity assist maneuvers, as it got slungshot around Earth on its way to Jupiter. Now, don't go away. We are going to be right back after this short commercial break. Now, gazing up into the sky, and astronomy, even before we knew what the word meant, have actually been important pursuits for mankind for millennia, as cultures from ancient to modern mapped the stars and planets and wondered about the will of the gods and men. But while stars and planets were very important to these cultures, the sun and moon were sometimes even more important. After all, they're bigger, more obvious, and they move a great deal across the skies every day. Lunar phases, solstices, the equinoxes were very important to these cultures, who created festivals and feast days surrounding them. Now, joining me to talk a little bit more about this importance for cultures worldwide is editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, Janice Stillman. Welcome back to Slooh, Janice.
Hi, Paul. It's great to be with you again.
Well, we've got these live images coming in of this full moon on this cosmic coincidence day. It's absolutely great. We've been holding a solstice show, June solstice show, I think now for about 8 years. So we've been doing this for a long time, but it makes it even more special that we've got Old Farmer's Almanac readers joining us as well tonight. So we've been talking about the solstice and midsummer celebrations, but I wanted to start very quickly with the full moon. We've explored the names of full moons in previous shows with you, and I believe this one is the strawberry moon, is that right?
Yes, the full moon names are always fun, and there's something that
Yeah.
folks who enjoy the almanac always have fun with too. And, as we've said before, that these really were identified and attached to the moon by Native Americans, and they were making these name associations based on their lives and what they observed around them. So, as you say, yes, June is traditionally known as the full strawberry moon. And it signaled to the Native Americans a time for gathering ripening fruit. Now, in England, it was called the full rose moon because roses were in bloom, and they didn't have strawberries then, you see over there. They weren't native up there.
I
But,
didn't know that.
there are a few other names that are also fun. And again, they indicate the way that folks named the moon for the world around them. In this case, one is the full leaf moon because Native Americans noticed that the trees were in full leaf. The crowns were full of leaves at about this time. And then another name was moon when the hot weather begins. I don't really know the Native American term for that, but it sounds pretty good even that way. And it, of course, was a time when the temperature heated up. And I think one of my all-time favorite all-year moon names is this tongue twister. Fish spoils easily moon, because of course this was the time before refrigeration, and it was again an indication of what happened in life to folks those days. So try to say that 3 times fast.
I will after the show, maybe. I didn't realise that this moon was also called the Rose Moon in the UK. I am in the UK, and just by chance, our very biggest rose bush, which is actually about 12 feet across, is looking like the full moon at the moment, and it's white. It's just a total huge ball, a sphere of white roses. So how appropriate that is. I shall look at that in a totally different light tomorrow morning. But strawberries, the strawberry moon, they also play, don't they, a part in solstice celebrations in some countries.
Well, in Sweden in particular, and the Swedes are love the outdoors, and people celebrate the summer solstice by eating the first strawberries of the season in Sweden. And then certainly that's something a lot of folks adopt. I know over in this side of the pond, for example, you see strawberries in the supermarkets about this time everywhere, and really even in gardens locally and elsewhere, their strawberries are really peaking just about now. We picked Alpen strawberries out of the field right outside the building here in Dublin, New Hampshire, just a week ago.
All right. Well, I have some cousins who live in Sweden, so maybe I should pop over there because I'm a bit of a strawberry fanatic myself. So that sounds like a very good excuse to go and see them. But the solstice isn't the only holiday celebrated around this time. There's also midsummer. Can you tell us a little bit about those celebrations and what they're like?
Sure, and I'd just like to take you back again a couple of centuries, maybe a few centuries actually, to the time of the ancient Celts, and this is going to set this up a little bit better.
Okay.
Back then, thousands of years ago, summer solstice was one of the quarter days. For the ancient Celts, this day, including along with autumn equinox, winter solstice, spring equinox, and of course today, marked the year's quarters, the beginning and end of the seasons. Mm-hmm. So we think of the June solstice as being the beginning of summer, but for them it was actually Midsummer Day, and indeed on the calendar, Midsummer Day is June 24th. It's also the anniversary of the birth of St. John the Baptist. So Midsummer Day, really to the farmer, was the midpoint of the growing season, halfway between planting and harvesting, and an occasion for celebration. And at that time, the kinds of celebrations were, again, all outdoors. There were bonfires. It was walking on fire walking, but wear your asbestos shoes for that if you try that this time of year. there's a carnival atmosphere about everything because folks were celebrating that they were, the plants were in the ground and they were starting to sprout. And so there was a promise of a good harvest to come.
Right. Okay. So that's another new one on me. The Old Farmer's Almanac is, I mean, there's no end to your archives and the fascinating and wonderful bits of fact that are there. How much of this gets put into the actual publication, Janice?
Well, from time to time, we mention things like this in the print publication, which, of course, has great visibility around the country and in Canada. But, on the website, almanac.com, you can get this kind of fun and folklore and legend and lore and facts really 24/7.
Okay, well, I know it's really popular with Slooh members and viewers of our shows, so do pop over there and have a look at the Old Farmer's Almanac website. Janice, thank you so much for joining us tonight on this strawberry full moon, rose. I'm going to call this one the rose full moon from now on in the UK, and to come and celebrate solstice with us.
It's been great to be with you, and I look forward to it next month.
Okay, see you then. That was Janice Stillman, editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. As Janice said, we do a full moon show every month for Slooh members in association with the Old Farmer's Almanac. They're always great fun. And we usually go into a little bit more depth about some of the cultural and historical parts of some of these stories. So that was really cool. Now, we are going to take a short commercial break, but don't go away, because coming up next, Bob Berman is back to talk about how solstices happen on other planets in our solar system. Plus, we will find out what Slooh was up to last weekend at the Wanderlust Yoga Festival. You're thinking, astronomy, yoga, what's the connection? We'll tell you. Be right back. Welcome back to Slooh's annual June solstice celebration. And tonight we've got the full moon joining it. But hey, look at this. This is Jupiter from the Chile High Magnification Telescope. This is one of the telescopes that Slooh members use every night. Now, Jupiter is getting quite low in the sky right now, so it's going to be a bit blurry, but that is going to be popping into color. And if you look carefully, you will see at least 3 of Jupiter's Galilean moons. There are 2. There's Ganymede and Io off to the right of there. So keep your eyes peeled on that image. Now, we've already told you that we experience the solstice twice a year here on Earth, thanks to our orbit and the tilt of the Earth. But what about the 7 other planets in our solar system? Here to talk to us all about how they experience solstices, or if they experience them at all, I want to welcome back Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, Bob Berman. Hello, Bob. Welcome back.
Great to be back again. That was fun. That was a great segment by Janice. I really learned something new.
Yeah, they're great fun. Now, I do want to pick up actually on one thing that she said, and it was also something I saw written about as this Jupiter image goes into color, and we'll talk about that any second, but you can see what we were talking about earlier. Jupiter looks squashed and flat in comparison to our moon, which looks like a perfect circle. Janice was talking about there also being a midsummer celebration around this time, and said that on the calendar, June 24th is marked down as midsummer. The start of the seasons, Bob, aren't they marked differently by astronomers? Like we're calling this the first day of summer in the Northern Hemisphere. But meteorologists, don't they have midsummer on today or around today?
Quite so. And it's sort of arbitrary when you're going to declare that to be summer or when a season starts. It's not arbitrary when the solstice is or when the equinox is. Those are when the days and nights are equal, or when there's the most sun in the sky, or when the sun is highest up. We get no say in that. That's dictated by nature, by the clockwork mechanism of the solar system. But to declare a certain date as, okay, that's the start of summer, or even to call them seasons. You know, there are certainly plenty of places that have only 2 seasons or 3 seasons. You know, the south of France, for example, has their drier season, has their colder season, but they don't honestly have 4 distinct seasons. So this is sort of arbitrary, and different cultures have established different dates for it. We get away easy because we just simply use the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes and say on those very moments, those very seconds, that starts each season.
Yeah, I have heard arguments though about it that today is not the first day of summer. No, it's midsummer. The Canary Islands, Bob, you mentioned different places. The Canary Islands are known as the Spring Islands because they have a spring-like climate all year round, and of course the observatory is 8,000 feet up on a volcano high above the clouds, normally in lots of stable air, and that's why astronomical telescopes are based on top of volcanoes. Now let's go back to talking about how other planets experience solstices, Bob. Now we've got Jupiter up here on the screen. Does Jupiter experience a solstice? And if
no, Jupiter doesn't have one, essentially, because it's only tipped 3 degrees from perpendicular, from its axis being perpendicular. You have to have a tilt to have a meaningful solstice. In other words, or an equinox, for example. Because
well, let's move on.
If it's going to vary, I'm sorry, what, Paul?
Let's move on then to Saturn. Saturn's the same, is it, Bob? Does that not have this? Actually, now let's talk about Mars again, Bob. You know, there it is. It's just hopped up, live image coming in from the Chile High Magnification Telescope. So just do a quick recap for us about Mars's solstice, because you said its axis, the tilt of its axis was roughly the same as the Earth?
Roughly the same. It's only 1 degree more than ours. So it's pretty much the same idea. And the only difference is that because Mars takes over twice the time of our orbit to go around the sun, means that the seasons last twice as long. But in terms of their extremities, they're very similar to Earth. In fact, most similar to Earth of all the planets.
Okay, now we will be seeing Saturn immediately after this Mars mission, so we can come back to that. But Bob, you were talking to me just before the show that there's one particular planet that has a really, really extreme kind of solstice, isn't there?
Yes, and that's Uranus, because Uranus is tipped 98 degrees from the way it moves through space, which means that during its 84-year orbit around the sun, at 1/4 of that intervals, so you're talking about 21-year intervals, it'll go through a solstice, an equinox, a solstice, an equinox, and 2 of those solstices involve the axis pointing right toward the sun, right toward the sun. So think of what that's going to do. Instead of our situation where today we experience the sun at its highest point in the sky and being up longest. On Uranus, if there's anyone on Uranus, it's a gassy surface, so you would just
be swimming, I expect,
in and be sucked in. You actually wouldn't stand there. But if you were on Uranus, what you would see is the sun not moving, essentially. Not only would it be right overhead at the solstice, but it would be stationary, be the equivalent of our North Star, Polaris. It would be unmoving, and anything else in the sky would make circles around it. So that, while the opposite solstice, let's say the southern hemisphere at that time, would have just utter darkness for over 20 years and no sign of sunlight. So you can't get more extreme than that.
So you've got to pick your holiday destination quite carefully when you're there. You say that Uranus is basically tilted 90 degrees. When did we first discover that, Bob?
Well, let's see. When it was first, you know how we discovered it? With the satellites, because when it was first discovered in 1781, all we saw was a green blob that showed no detail at all. And in fact, that's why we started calling other green blobs planetary nebulae, because we thought they all looked like the planet Uranus. Uranus was the paradigm for green blobs. So it was only
Right.
when the first satellites were discovered, and Uranus has
And
5 of them.
satellites, you're
Miranda,
meaning moons.
that's right.
Yeah.
Miranda and Ariel and Umbriel and Titania and Oberon, did we observe, and these were discovered, we're talking about the 19th century, that they did different things depending upon Uranus's orbit. Sometimes they'd move in circles around Uranus like a bullseye. And at other times they would go straight up and down like an elevator. In other words, when those solstices during the, not the solstice, but the equinox, when both of the axes point equally sideways to the sun, the moon's going around the equator just go up and down and up and down. Whereas during solstices, when one pole or the other, they make circles around Uranus, either clockwise or counterclockwise, depending upon whether it's the northern or the southern hemisphere circle. So observing the moons immediately showed us the tilt of the planet.
Well, you know, we can pick up the moons of Uranus in Slooh's telescopes, and that would be quite an interesting thing to go back over, actually. Go over some of those images from 13 years ago and maybe say, now here we've got
look
Bob.
at this, Saturn.
A live image. Take us through this one, Bob, because this changes its tilt to our perspective on Earth. Does that have anything to do with some of the things we've been talking about tonight?
Oh, very much so. And this is so gorgeous because this year and next year and the year after, these are the 3 years where the rings are tilted most toward us because they're tilted most toward the sun. Now, Saturn is 9.5 times our distance from the sun. And that means that from Saturn's perspective, when you look toward the sun, you're always looking towards Earth because Earth is making little tiny circles around the sun from Saturn's perspective. And when it's during its slow year, 29.5 years, 29.4577 Earth years. So during that period, it alternates between tilting towards us, which it is doing now, and those rings circle the equator. That's so perfect, which means you can see where the equator is because those rings are lighting it up, are directly above it. And that means we exactly can see that it is indeed the solstice on Saturn. It'll actually be next year, but just like on Earth where the word solstice means the sun has stopped, well, the sun has stopped on Saturn too, essentially. When you get around the solstice, there's not much change. And that's why Saturn's going to look the same this year and next year and the year after, as it's tilted most toward the sun, and that means most towards the Earth. It's got a tilt also similar to Earth's and Mars. The tilt is 27.5 degrees compared to our 23.5 degrees. So very similar seasons, except with Saturn, because it's such a long period, almost 30 years around the sun. Each season lasts 7.5 years instead of the 3 months that we experience. Look at this. This is beautiful. This shows the equinox on Saturn, which happened 7 years ago.
Yeah, and this is a whole series of images collected by Maynard, one of the Slooh members. And this is one of the great exercises you can go through collecting Slooh images over the years. And we see these changes in the tilt of Saturn. We've seen changes in the Great Red Spot on Jupiter and changes in all of its features. And we've seen the, dust storms on Mars from one season to another. It really is great fun doing this. Now, Bob, you celebrated the solstice outdoors last weekend, didn't you, at the Wanderlust Yoga Festival? We're going to be talking to Helen Avery about that event, but how did you enjoy it at the weekend?
Oh, well, I did, and I have to say that I wasn't sure that it was going to be a match because what I do is so kind of geeky and scientific-y, and this is, as you say, a giant yoga festival with a lot of young people that are there, and they're into chanting and meditation. So what we did was I would speak to the crowd for 10 or 15 minutes at a time, and then Helen, who is just marvelous, would lead chants, meditations, sun salutations, asanas, yoga postures, and spiritual things, all revolving around the sun and the solstice for the same amount of time, 10 or 15 minutes, and then we trade off. Now, you would think, I was worried that it would be kind of jarring and so disparate that I would be ruining the nice vibration that Helen had set up. and I'd be coming back and doing logical mind stuff after she had made everyone so peaceful. But you know what? I needn't have worried, because we had giant crowds for our programs, and they came up to us after and they loved it. Several said that it was their favorite thing at Wanderlust. The people were marvelous. Helen was marvelous. We used one of our portable Slooh telescopes and showed everybody the sun and the moon, and it couldn't have been better. It's just this weekend that just ended.
Excellent. I mean, we're going to be talking to Helen in a moment about that, but I'm glad it was an enjoyable event for you. It looks like you had some absolutely wonderful weather there, Bob, and you know, being able to look at the moon as well and the sun, of course, must have been fantastic. Bob, thank you so much for joining us tonight to share the weird and the wonderful about the full moon, full strawberry moon on this June solstice event. We'll see you again very soon.
Thank you, Paul. A pleasure.
That was Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Bob was wearing two hats tonight, Bob Berman. You can watch Bob twice a week, Slooh members, every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 till 7 p.m. Eastern Time, as he takes Slooh members on a tour of some of the best objects you can see through the telescopes. Now, as we look at that image of Bob at the Wanderlust Festival, Slooh got to be part of the Wanderlust Yoga Festival this past weekend. Bob co-hosted a couple of the sessions alongside our next guest, Helen Avery. Helen is a minister and yoga instructor. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. I mean, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Has the moon come up where you are yet, Helen?
Well, I'm afraid I'm looking into a garden in Brooklyn, so I don't have much view of the sky right now. So I can't tell you, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, out of Brooklyn, I would think probably the moon is about the only astronomical object other than the sun that you can see with light pollution and stuff like that. So.
Actually, you'd be surprised. The other day I went out and I saw Mars and I saw Saturn. So it was...
brilliant. Oh,
yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, it was great.
So listen, tell our viewers tonight, we've got Almanac readers and we've also got viewers of the Science Channel joining us tonight. Tell us what the Wanderlust event was. I don't know very much about it. What did you get up to?
Sure. So it's amazing. I mean, 6,000 people attend,
Wow.
and not our classes, thank God. And don't listen to Bob. He is a yogi for sure. So we were at noon up the top of the mountain with this gorgeous view over all of the mountains and the sun coming down. And then at sunset, we were down on base camp, also being able to watch the sun set over the mountains and the periwinkle and rose quartz sky. And then the moon was rising, and Bob sort of showed people through the telescope the moon. And as he mentioned, we sort of interacted together. And really the way I see it is like yoga astronomy is like this marrying of science and spirituality. And there's Bob showing some people through his telescope at the end. Because often, you know, it's very polarized. It didn't used to be science and spirituality. And thanks to quantum physics, we're kind of converging again. So we're really looking at, I mean, there's so many parallels between yoga and yogis and astronomers. You know, we're both...
So how does it?
Sorry, go on.
How does it intersect them? Because, you know, for some viewers, they might be thinking, astronomy, yoga, really? I've heard this term, though, sun salutation. What's that about? You know,
sure. Yeah, so they're called the Surya Namaskar. And we did those at Wanderlust. So for the yogis, the sun is really, really important. So thousands of years ago, they wrote about the sun, not just as giver of life, but also as like a symbol for oneness, divine consciousness inside of us and outside of us. And the sun salutations are 12 postures,
Right.
hands up in the air, hands at the heart, that each one is a meditation and a prayer to the sun. And each has its own mantra.
Okay.
And so we sort of thank the sun for many things, for, you know, the strength it provides us in nourishment, but also that it's always there to wake us, that it shines on everyone and never discriminates. And how do we cultivate that in ourselves, that giving, loving nature? It's there we are. This is just preparing for our salutes.
Are there connections to other astronomical objects, or is it mainly the sun?
It's mainly the sun with yoga, definitely.
Mm.
We're also, and the moon, we're sort of divided up in yoga between the solar aspect of ourselves and the lunar aspect of ourselves, like the yin and the yang. So a lot of the
Right.
practices of yogas are sort of combining the two and coming into balance. But the sun is really seen as the divine light within us all. And even in our namaste, if you've ever heard of that, what yogis say at the
Yeah.
end, that's like the light in me bows to the light in you. It's a lot about the light. And the solstice in particular is when the sun's the highest in the sky in the hemisphere that we're in. And that represents like the ascension of man, of humanity, of really sort of rising up to our full potential and sort of getting in touch with the infinite inside ourselves. So lots of prayers for yogis around the solstice to ask for those blessings so that we can become this loving, infinite, peaceful being.
Right. Okay. I have to admit a pretty thorough ignorance of yoga and its discipline, but I do find this connection absolutely fascinating. I had, it goes back in so many of the different shows that we do. The roots of astronomy go so far back in our culture and mythology, and starts off obviously in astrology as well. But I don't know if you heard earlier, but I'm off to Stonehenge after the show.
Beautiful.
Because there were 20,000 people there,
Wow.
all just wanting to take in, the summer solstice,
Right.
with tonight, this wonderful, wonderful bonus that we get, that as the sun rises this morning, we're going to be having the full moon setting in the opposite side of the sky. I mean, I'm so looking forward to it. And I've often said, it is a science in astronomy that I'm really passionate about, but it's also where I get all of my spiritualism for. It's when I'm
Right.
at the Slooh observatories or at a site like this where I just gaze up in awe and absolute wonder at it all. And it sounds like yoga is a discipline which has refined that almost into an art.
Well, it's considered a science, actually, yoga. You're not supposed to take any beliefs. It's not a religion. There are practices and techniques you do to really go inside and see whether you can discover the infinite. And so you're supposed to suspend belief. And maybe that's sort of the parallels also with astronomy. You've got to be very curious and questioning of why are we here, and be in that sense of wonder where you can then just tune into that inner part of yourself. So yeah, there are a lot of parallels.
Now, we can see that it looks like you had some terrific response down at the Wanderlust Festival. What have you got coming up? Because I know that, you're really quite enthused about, this linking of astronomy and yoga. Have you got some more plans to work with us at Slooh?
I hope so. Obviously, we've got the meteor showers, which I think you could definitely make some connections with, and really anything where you can get people to look up at the sky. I mean, yogis love looking up at the sky. And what's interesting is that, everyone talks about, oh, I love sitting under the stars, and they forget we have a star that we're under from the minute the sun rises,
every day.
or we're under it all the time, but we can see it. So people forget that. But nothing sort of in concrete right now, but I'm hoping to do a few things with Slooh. It's such an honor to be with such a lovely community, and really
we're not going to let you get away, so you're stuck with us now, whether or not you want to or not, Helen. So, we'll certainly get maybe some summer events as well, maybe at Slooh HQ going in Connecticut, because I would love to personally hear some more about these connections. But for tonight, thank you so much for joining us on this summer solstice.
Thank you very much. Have a blessed day.
Okay. Helen. That was Helen Avery, a yoga instructor who worked with our very own Bob Berman at the Wanderlust Yoga Festival over the last weekend. It really is space for everyone here. We really mean that. And, from all of our guests, from astrophysicists through to Slooh members coming on the show, we all get inspired from very, very different directions, but all linked back to the night sky and the wonders that we see in it. As we look once again at this lovely view of this full moon, as you can see, what Bob was saying, what this full moon, it's really good for observing the light and dark features, but we don't get to see some of the beautiful detail along that terminator, which is the region between day and night on the moon, and that really pops out in the Slooh telescope. So it's a good exercise to do, collect lunar phases by reserving missions on the Slooh telescopes. Now, coming up next, we have been looking live on the full moon through the Slooh scopes all evening, but now we're going to be speaking with an astrophotographer, Robert Reeves, to find out how you can take some beautiful photographs of the moon all of your own. Now, to our new viewers tonight, joining us from the Old Farmer's Almanac, and viewers of the Science Channel, if you're enjoying what you're seeing and hearing tonight, I want to encourage you to become a Slooh member of the Slooh community. It's free to try and there's no obligation. At its core, members control the telescopes that we've been looking at tonight, both at our Canary Islands flagship observatory and the Chile Observatory, via a really simple but powerful interface to see all that glows in space. In fact, Slooh members have taken well over 4 million photos of over 50,000 different objects in the night sky. And Slooh works like a jukebox. You know, one member is in control of the telescope at any one time, but all of the other members get to see the live telescope view. So just like a jukebox, and then everybody can contribute to the ongoing conversation. I'll tell you, there's some really good conversations as well in what we call the Slooh Clubhouse. We always say, Slooh, it feels like we're cavemen and women gathered around a campfire. We wonder together about the universe and share our great diversity of perspectives. It really is space for everyone here. So please do give it a try, and in the process, you'll be supporting our ability to make programs like this available to the public. Now, don't go away, because we will be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to Slooh's annual June solstice celebration. And tonight we've got the full moon at the same time. We've already heard from Janice Stillman, editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Tonight's moon was called the strawberry moon, or here in the UK, it was called the rose moon, the full rose moon, which is very appropriate given my garden at the moment. Now, look at this view, this live view from the Slooh Observatories. Fabulous view of the full moon. We all love staring into space and taking in the majesty and beauty of the cosmos. But there are a great deal of our members who also enjoy pointing a camera up to the stars as well. And right now, I would like to welcome astrophotographer Robert Reeves to the show, who has taken some beautiful photos of the focus of tonight's show, the moon. Robert, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here.
Now, tell me, first of all, how did you get started in photography?
Well, I took my first picture of the moon back in 1959, before there was even a space program to go to the moon. So it's really hard to say what pushed me into it. It was just too long ago. I really don't remember. It's just been part of me for my entire life.
So from a very early age of having a camera, owning a camera, you know, your initial reaction was to point it towards the sky, wasn't it?
Very much so. In 1958, I got a 3-inch telescope for Christmas. And one of the first things I pointed it to, of course, was the moon.
Yeah.
And was fascinated with it ever since. I've been involved in all areas of astrophotography, but I keep gravitating back to the moon.
And it's no surprise. I mean, we're seeing some of your images now. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. I mean, the level of detail which is in these, I've never seen lunar images like this at any point. But you know, what made me think just then was, you know, there are you with your camera, and one of your first instincts is to point it towards the sky. it kind of feels a little bit like Galileo, who was not the first person to own a telescope, but he was one of the first people to decide to point it up there and to the same target. The moon, I think, is the first target that Galileo pointed his moon to. So can you tell us a little bit about how you go about photographing the moon? You know, what kind of equipment are you using for this? This is a really high magnification view, isn't it?
Well, actually, I used fairly small telescopes. I used a Celestron 8 for almost 40 years. And then about 3 years ago, I was able to upgrade to a Celestron 11. And then about a year ago, I actually downgraded. I went down to a 7-inch telescope.
Oh, okay.
I got a Skywatcher Maxudov 180 millimeter Skywatcher, and it does quite well. I enjoy the telescope. I'm going, after a year, I'm going to take it back down and put my Celestron 11 back up this summer,
Yeah.
and work with it some more. But I like to make a point that you don't need a huge telescope to take excellent pictures of the moon. Oh, the one that's showing right now. I'm amused by that because you look at the shadow being cast by the crater bird, it looks exactly like Batman.
I was about to say,
That got my attention the moment I saw it through when I pointed the moon to it that night. This is, oh my God, that's Batman.
I know.
But anyway,
I hadn't
I
hadn't seen this image before, Robert, but my immediate reaction was, that's Batman's head. So
yep.
What a fabulous,
We
fabulous
think
image.
alike.
We're also great Celestron fans, and we've been using Celestron 14-inch telescopes at the observatories for 13 years now, and they've really been our workhorses. And as you say, you don't need, though, a very large telescope to image the moon. In fact, it can be quite a problem because the moon is such a bright object. You don't need all of that light gathering power of a large telescope. But tell me, what kind of camera are you using on the back of all of your telescopes to capture images like this?
It's actually a small solid-state video camera. It's produced by Celestron. It's the Skyris series of cameras.
Oh,
I've
beautiful.
used the
Yeah.
274 initially, and then I upgraded to a 132. And right now I use the 236, their latest version.
Yeah.
And it's a video camera that takes, in my process, I take 3,000 video frames. It's about 8 gigabytes of data. And then I process that video in a software called AutoStacker, which combines the best of all of those images, all those 3,000 images, into a single frame and saves it as a single TIFF image. And then I import that into Photoshop and enhance it and process it and sharpen it. So it's basically a 3-step process. You capture the video first, and then you process it down into a single image, and then you enhance that image.
And this is the process which is known as lucky imaging, which is basically you're taking that high frame rate video. We also use the Celestron Skyris cameras. My word, they're lovely little instruments to use. But you take a huge number of frames, and then, as you say, the software rejects the bad ones when the atmosphere is moving, when you've got bad seeing, selects all of those good ones, then combines them. And really, Robert, I've seen a lot of moon images in my time, but frankly, it's not just because you're on the show. I have never seen lunar images of the quality of yours. Now, tell me one thing, because I often talk to Bob on shows about this. You know, we often say that actually the full moon, counterintuitively for a lot of people new to astronomy, is really not a very good time to image the moon. And your images are showing just that. Now, most of your images look like you're deliberately trying to capture a lot of shadows and a lot of contrast. So are you looking for specific phases or specific areas of the moon?
Well, whenever I image the moon, I tend to hug near the terminator, where that's where the greatest amount of contrast and detail is. So the camera has such a small field of view compared to the telescope that it's basically like looking at through a 300 power eyepiece. So
Yeah.
you're fairly limited in the territory you can image at any one time. So I stay close to the terminator and try to capture the dramatic shadows, and the contrast enhances the detail, of course. I used to try to do mosaics of the entire moon and then assemble it into a single image of the entire
That's
lunar
a lot of
phase.
work.
But after doing that for just about every lunar phase, I don't have to do that anymore. So now I just concentrate on trying to get the most detail that I can.
And these are beautiful. I mean, this image is the first one that we showed, and frankly, it is the first time I've seen it, and it just knocked my socks off. It actually took me back. I actually sat back in my seat. I don't think I have ever seen this level of detail in any lunar image. We can even see there on the walls of that crater the way over time it's slumped down into its various terraces on the outside.
Yeah, the upper crater is Aristotle, and the lower one is Eudoxus. And they're very typical complex craters on the moon with slumped terraced walls. And of course, the low sun accentuates that.
Yeah.
But this is one of the early pictures that I took with the Celestron 11. I'm really pleased with it.
I know that's absolutely cracking. I mean, I bet you had some good conditions for that one as well. Now, any tips for wannabe moon photographers, Robert? We've got Science Channel viewers watching, and we've got readers of the Old Farmer's Almanac tonight. If they want to start taking some photographs of the moon, you got any tips for them?
Well, don't be discouraged if you don't have perfect conditions. I live in Central Texas. And the past couple of nights have been an example. The seeing was terrible. You point the telescope to the moon, you're looking at the image on the screen, and it's just swimming like it's in an ocean.
Wobbling around, yeah.
Yeah, wobbling like a shaking bowl of jello. So sometimes it just doesn't work. You have to be patient. And sometimes the seeing is bad, sometimes the seeing is good. But keep at it, keep trying, and
like so many branches. Yeah, like so many branches of amateur astronomy and astrophotography, patience and tenacity and working through those early stages. I'm with you there. That's really important. So, Robert, thank you so much for joining us here at Slooh tonight. We've got to invite you back to talk in more detail, I think, about some of these wonderful, wonderful images. But thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
And that was Robert Reeves, astrophotographer. Wow, I have never seen, that's not Saturn, by the way, that is the moon on the screen. I have never seen moon images of that kind of detail and quality. And I was only seeing them, on the broadcast that I get here, which is a bit fuzzy. Wow, they were brilliant. He's been doing it for some time, so yeah, maybe a bit of practice. I better get out there and practice my moon photography, I think. Now, here we are. We are nearing the end of our June solstice full moon show. We've heard all about what is a solstice. What is it? How's it caused by the Earth's tilt and its orbit around the sun? Why is it such a coincidence tonight? How rare was the event tonight that it was full moon on solstice? Do solstices occur on other planets like Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus? We've heard it all from Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, Bob Berman. We've heard from Janice Stillman as well, editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, telling us all about the strawberry moon, or what is now in the Cox household going to be called the rose moon. Don't forget, you can learn about every single full moon here at Slooh. So if there's a full moon, you know that we're going to be on for a show with the Old Farmer's Almanac, with Janice telling us all about that. And we always cover a bit more mythology and cultural aspects of that as well. And we've heard there from Robert and looked at some of his astounding images. That was pretty cool. I really enjoyed that bit. And we also, of course, heard from Slooh's yoga enthusiast and astronomy enthusiast, Helen Avery. That was really cool as well. So we're going to do far more of that. And I hope if we've got some Wanderlust attendees viewing the show tonight, do tell us and send us any questions or any photos that you took at Wanderlust of Bob Berman and the telescope and you guys doing your yoga and sun salutations. That was really cool. Now, before we go, I want to remind you about a couple of huge shows we've got coming up here at Slooh. On June 30th, first of all, we are celebrating Asteroid Day in a very big way. We're going to be taking a look back over Slooh's 12-year legacy of bringing you live asteroids, the biggest and the best and the closest passes to Earth of near-Earth asteroids. We'll also be looking at that show into the future when we consider, what we consider is a little discussed far greater threat to life on Earth than asteroids. You can find out all about that on that show. We're also going to be finding out what NASA, along with some private companies, are doing to protect us from the risk of asteroids, and whether or not they're doing all they should, or are they doing too much, maybe? Is the risk exaggerated, we're wondering. And we are also going to be looking to the future to discover what good might come from tracking and visiting asteroids, or if asteroids really are the threat we should be focused on. And then our next show following that, I am really looking forward to this. Actually, I look forward to all Slooh shows, but this one, you know me, I'm a bit of a Jupiter fan. July 4th, as well as running off to see the new Independence Day movie. You can't do it around these times, 10:30 p.m. Eastern. You've got to be here at Slooh, because you've got to be watching us as we join the adventure of the Juno mission as it makes its final approach to the mighty gas giant Jupiter. The orbital entry starts at 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, and so does our show. That is one not to be missed. We are going to show you some of the live images that we took using the Slooh telescopes. We actually took images of the Juno spacecraft as it got flung around the Earth on its gravity assist. That was the only way they could get that tiny speck of a spacecraft all the way out to Jupiter, and we were the only people who were taking photos of it that night, so take a look at those. But anyway, for tonight, as we look at this last image of the full moon from the Chile high magnification telescope, look at that image, isn't that gorgeous? Oh, Slooh members, check out tomorrow. I'm going to post an image of this because early this evening I actually captured an image of this just as it was coming up above the horizon. So you've got the full moon silhouetted by the Andes mountains in the distances and the trees and stuff like that. Really cool image. I'll share that in the clubhouse tomorrow. So it's only left for me to say thank you very much to the Old Farmers Almanac readers for joining us tonight. Also, our new partners over at the Science Channel, viewers of the Science Channel. I hope you've enjoyed our coverage tonight. Don't miss. If it's going on in space, basically Slooh are covering it live. So please come back and join us for another show. But for tonight, that is it. It's June solstice. I am off to Stonehenge to go and see 20,000 other people who want to watch the sunrise over those ancient, ancient stones, just as the full moon is setting behind us. That's going to be an event. I'll see you on the next show. Goodbye for now.